ni pa kare kare ni pa sa
Greetings, my name's Jack Jennings, and that was a little bit of Raag Hansadhwani. Raag Hansadhwani is, well, it's just one of the most beautiful, pure, simple rags that we have in Indian classical music. It originates from the South Indian system of Carnatic music, so that's where the origins of the scale really lie. But it's been taken on so beautifully into the North Indian tradition as well. I'm pleased to announce that Ashnaa Sasikaran will be joining us on this course to contribute Sargam accompaniment to the exercises and the full composition that's coming a bit later. As she recites the syllables in synchronization with the guitar, it'll help you to understand and absorb the Sargam system, and subconsciously you'll be processing these different combinations that we have within this rag, so it'll really aid your learning process. The thing about this rag is that it just has a very simple ascending and descending structure which use the same notes, and it's a pentatonic scale, so just 5 notes. But what makes it really special is that it has these quite big gaps between the notes, and you've only got one part of the scale where there's actually a semitone, where you have 2 notes right next to each other in terms of how the frets are laid out on the guitar or the keys on the piano. And apart from that, we have sort of just slightly wider gaps, or in some cases a gap of 2 whole tones, so we completely skip out the note da. So this just means that it's got a very spacious sound to it, and it just evokes this kind of purity and this kind of clarity of mood and emotion, and a state of mind which is just very peaceful. So it's a beautiful rag.
Sari ga pa re ga ri sa ni pa ni sa sari ga pa re ka re ni pa ga pa sa.
And it's associated with the goddess Saraswati, who is the goddess of speech and music and art, creativity, and with the swan, who is her consort. She rides on a swan. So Raag Hansadhwani is the swan song of Saraswati. So yeah, you see where I'm going with this. It's just all about the purity and the benevolent energy of the goddess Saraswati bringing music to mankind and throughout the universe. Now let's just look very simply at the structure. We're going to be playing it, we're in the key of D, and I've changed the 2 low strings on my guitar for Shakir strings. So these are just regular guitar strings, they're gauge 8, so they're very thin, and they're just both tuned to D, so that just, you know, chimes in well with the open D string. And then I'm in standard tuning from then on. That's just the D, G, B and E, but we don't really use some of those notes, so they sound a bit foreign right now. So let's just look at the ascending structure in the octave between the open D string and 7th fret on the G string. That's the first octave that we'll be using. And to begin with, we're just going to look at intervals, the numbered system, and then we'll switch over to Sargam, and you'll see how the system works really well in combination with that. So first of all, we just have the open D string, so that's the root of the scale, note number 1. Then 2nd note there on 2nd fret of the D string, the 3rd note on the 4th fret of the D string, then we just can move to the 2nd fret on the G string, and that's the 5th, because we've actually skipped over the 1, 2, 3, 4. We've skipped the 4th, so we just get 1, 2, 3, 5. So these are just notes from the major scale. And then we have the 7th, so we've actually skipped over the 6th note. The 6th note would have been on fret 4 here. So we've skipped over that now, we've gone from a 5 to a 7, okay? So it fits in with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the major scale, but we're just selecting the numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 1. If you know about arpeggios in Western music, then this might sound quite familiar because it's very similar to a major 7 arpeggio. An arpeggio is if you take a chord and then you extract the notes from that chord and just arrange them in scale order. So for example, this is a D major 7 played with my open Shakir strings as well, so it sounds a little bit more colourful than usual. So in that chord we have a root, major 3rd, 5th and the 7th. So they're in a slightly different order in the way that they're arranged pitch-wise. But if we put those into scale order, you'd have the 1, 3, 5, 7, 1. So for Raag Hansadhwani, all we're doing is just adding a second into that. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 7. So that just fleshes it out so it becomes a pentatonic scale. But it's got that sort of major 7, that kind of romantic spacey sound that you get from the major 7 chord. It's got that kind of atmosphere to it in its Raag form. So that's completing the first octave, and from here we could keep on going on the single G string, which is a really nice way just to play more linear phrases in more of a vocal style. So when I say vocal style, I mean doing ornamentations and slides which imitate the sound of the voice in Indian classical music. So we can carry on in that fashion. So that was the first note, then the second and third on the 9th and 11th frets, then moving on to fret 14 playing the 5th, and then up at fret 18 we have the 7th, and then 19 we have the root. So you can just do that on the G string. And there's something nice about the consistency with the tone colour of the single string. So because the tone doesn't change between the string changes, there's no string changes, so it's there's something just very unbroken about that, because the timbre of the string, the colour of the string is the same throughout. So that's something that's quite nice. But we could also repeat the same kind of shape that we had in the low octave. We could do that in the higher octave. So we could start D string on fret 12 and then use the 14 and 16, so we get the first, second and third note there. 12, 14, 16. And then we could then switch to the G string, so we've got the 5th note on fret 14, and then again the 18, 19 to play the 7 and 1. 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 1, 7, 5, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so these are just slightly different ways to play it. It's good just to have that variation. As I was saying, if you're playing a single string, then it just encourages you to be a little bit more seamless with the transitions between the notes. But if you want to have a bit more staccato sound, a bit more punctuation on each note, then maybe the 2-string pattern would be useful. And of course you can still play legato kind of things with that too. To expand this scale and Raag further into the 3rd octave, there's a particular pattern that's very useful for that, which I'll go through in the next lesson. There's a few different ways that we can actually use multi-string patterns to get the most out of this Raag and just express it slightly differently on the fretboard to get a slightly different feel and sound within the phrases. So now we're going to do the same progression, but we're going to use Sargam, which is the vocal system of Indian music, where we assign a syllable to each note of the scale. And this is really the most beneficial way to do it, I believe, because it really tunes your ear into the language of the octave in the way that the notes present themselves. And after a while, the syllables start to spring into your mind as you hear the notes. The syllables actually flash up in your mind because you've built that association. So you hear, and it's as if you've got something in the background going sa re ga pa ni sa ni pa ga re sa. There's a link there between that syllable and that sound and those progressions of notes. So it really helps to train your ear in terms of relative pitch. So if we look at the diagram now, you can see the opened D string, that's now Sa, S stands for Sa, and then Re is the next note, and then we have our Ga. Moving on to Pa, so that's on the G string now, Pa, and then Ni and Sa. So that 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 1 is now Sa, Re, Ga, Pa, Ni, Sa. And then that continues. So Sa, Re, Ga, Pa, Ni, Sa on the single G string. Sa, Re, Ga, Pa, Ni, Sa. And then the same if you're using the D string, it would be Sa, Re, Ga, Pa, Ni, Sa. And then the descending form is just the same in reverse. So Sa, Ni, Pa, Ga, Re, Sa. Sa, Ni, Pa, Ga, Re, Sa. So it's Sa, Re, Ga, Pa, Ni, Sa. Sa, Ni, Pa, Ga, Re, Sa. If I do it in one smooth motion without repeating the top note, it sounds like this. Sa, Re, Ga, Pa, Ni, Sa, Ni, Pa, Ga, Re, Sa. So this Sa, Re, Ga, Pa, Ni, Sa, Ni, Pa, Ga, Re, Sa, this just becomes like a mantra in your mind. You just get used to that progression. Sa, Re, Ga, Pa, Ni, Sa, Ni, Pa, Ga, Re, Sa. And you start to picture the fretboard and think about the Sargam, and when you're listening to the music you try to think about the Sargam. You do all of these things just so you build the connections, and then there's just different phrases that come from these collections of notes. So Ni, Sa, Ni, Re, Sa, Ni, Sa, Ni, Ga, Re, Sa, Ni, Re, Sa, Ga, Re, Sa, Ni, Pa, Ni, Re, Sa. So you just get used to the language of the Sargam and how you combine the different syllables together to make those musical phrases. But it seems to just really stick in your mind in a slightly different way. I think it maps onto the language centers of your brain more explicitly because you're using syllables. You're using syllables linked to the actual frequencies, but you also sing them. So I don't sing too much because I think you guys might get tired of my voice. But if you start to sing them, then it just really helps your mind to be so in tune with the notes that you're playing, and you've got such a clear sense in your mind of what that interval is, and it just helps to build up the musical memory and reinforces the relative pitch.
Sa re ga pa re ga re sa ni pa ni sa. Sa re ga pa re ni pa ga pa sa.
Let's take a moment just to look at a key phrase which really signifies the character of this rag, and it's a phrase that it's nice to come back to in your improvisations just to keep, reaffirming the essence of the rag Hansadhwani. So this phrase is Ni, Pa, Ga, Re, Ni, Pa, Sa. And you tend to pause on the Re, so Ni, Pa, Ga, Re, let that hang for a moment, and then Ga, Re, Ni, Pa, Sa. So Ga, Re, Ni, so skipping over Sa on the way down, Ga, Re, Ni, and then Pa, often with a sort of glide back up to Sa. So you don't have to skip Sa. So you could play Ga, Re, Sa, Ni, Pa, Ni, Sa. You could just play through each note, but it just works particularly well in this phrase. Ga, Re, Ni, skipping Sa, and then Pa, Sa, skipping Ni, or just maybe visiting Ni, but then doing a smooth transition to Sa. That's a nice way to do it. That's sliding and then into a bend. So I'm just using the sustain And because I've got the open D string and the Shakir is ringing out, your ear can really sense when you've got that note in tune, because it just becomes very still. You can just hear that moment where it's harmonised with the open strings. So just a straight slide is fine, or you can sort of just exaggerate that transition a little bit. So this is a very nice phrase, and this high knee as well, it's nice just to elaborate that with a slight descend from Sa, or you could start with knee and go up and just touch Sa a little bit. So it's knee, it just touches the high Sa, not clearly, just a little suggestion of that note. So that was the So that was the ni, pa, ga, re, followed by the ga, re, ni, pa, sa. So the timing is quite important with this phrase as well. Of course, I mean, you could play. So of course you could play it faster, especially if you're in a more rhythmic part of the performance. Or even put that part on the D string, make that transition a little bit smoother. So you could still use it in a more rhythmic fashion, a bit faster, you know, in the performance, but the essence of this phrase really comes out more in the alap, in the gentle unfolding of the rag, in more of a free time sense. And using the ornamentations just to refresh the phrase and play it slightly differently.
Ni pa kare kare ni pa sa.
So that gives you an overall just feeling of the rag and the essence of the rag coming through. There's so many more things that you can do with this scale. It's not the most obvious rag to actually see how you start to expand it, because there's quite big jumps between the notes. It doesn't really fit that well into standard box patterns on the guitar either. So it's not the easiest rag to actually start to do a lot of different rhythmic things with and to get a really smooth flow across the whole guitar. So later on in this course we're going to look at very particular exercises which are really going to help expand the range of the guitar that we can use and just get really fluid, seamless transitions between these different ranges, so we can open up the sound of the rag and just get the guitar doing, you know, all of the best things it can do in this style. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and looking forward to seeing you later on in the course if you choose to come along and check it out. If you'd like to access this course, it's being released over this week and next week on my Patreon program, so go and have a look over there. I'm also pleased to announce that the Raag Jog and Tihai course that I've made with Manish Pinglay is now available in its full form on my website playleadguitar.net. Once you subscribe on Patreon, I'll set up your account so you have access to this complete course. You will also gain access to the Essential Techniques for Indian Guitar course, which is the best way to get all of your bearings and fully understand this style and make sure you're ready for the journey ahead. There's other short courses on Raag Yaman and Raag Bageshri that are on the Patreon program, so there's a lot there to check out. And as of today, the Raag Jog course is also available as a one-off purchase if you'd like to just zone in on that particular course. This is by far the most advanced course that I've made, and it really dives into Tihai rhythms, which are a fascinating part of Indian classical music. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. Please like and subscribe and comment. There's lots of interesting things coming up soon, so stay tuned and look forward to seeing you on another video.